Hello everybody, MegaZardX here, back at it again to give y'all another very exciting video. And for today, I was going through some old classic games, anything ranging from the NES all the way up into the GameCube. As everybody knows, you're able to play Nintendo classics, everything that ranges from all those different consoles, from the home consoles and those handheld consoles as well. And you can play a good chunk of Nintendo's history from all those different retro systems. And it's a really nice service, being able to go through and play a lot of these things. Yes, I know it's tied to the subscription-based model. Some people wish that they could just buy those games separately or whatever. Regardless of that argument, we're sitting that over there to the side. One thing that's kind of a glaring issue is the release date or the consistency of when we get some of these NSO games dropped out on the service though. Other games such as like the GameCube, which is the newest console that happened to be introduced in this thing, that one has a steady drop flow of getting at least one game per month. Like, with it being a brand new system, there's not like anything to kind of snuff at least with that system though. But when you look at other systems like the 64, the NES, the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy, any one of those, you start to kind of notice, if you go back and look at the history in terms of when we got those games dropping, it's been quite a bit of time for some of those drops. And I feel like at this point, we should be at least a little bit more consistent with some of these drops, especially with some of the fairly newer ones like GBA or Game Boy or something like that. There's still a vast library of games that they're able to put out on the system though. So in today's video, I just kind of want to go through and just give my thoughts on the NSO service where it stands right now, and some things that they can be improving upon, and why in the world are we getting some slow trickle effects for some of these games though. So let's go ahead and jump up in it. But if you hadn't already done so, make sure you go and hit that like button, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that bell to stay up to date on all things video game related I feel like talking about and discussing. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight up into this video. So as it stands now, in terms of all of the systems we have available on the NSO service, you can kind of split them up into two different categories. Either the base NSO subscription base, which is like that $20 a year subscription base just for the basic old tier, and then you had the expansion pack tier, which is the $50 per year subscription base thing. So in the basic tier, we have the NES, the Super Nintendo, along with the Game Boy. Those are the three systems that are associated within that tier. Go up to the expansion pack tier, then you get a few more systems: the Game Boy Advance, the N64, and the GameCube if you happen to own a Nintendo Switch 2. And those are the current 6 systems on the market, plus with Sega Genesis that's also included within the expansion pack tier. And that's what we got, 7 different systems that Nintendo's able to pull all of these old games from and put on their NSO subscription-based service, or should I dub now as Nintendo Classics, is what they're trying to rebrand it as now though. You know what, let's go ahead and look at the NES, because I was looking at all of these different games that came out, and I had to pull up the old Wikipedia page just to kind of see exactly like when was the very last drop that we had up on it though. It wasn't too long ago, but it's still a good chunk of time. You have to go all the way back to December 12th of 2024 with the release of Tetris. That's almost like a little more than half a year ago at this given point. And even further, if you wanted to see, well, what were the games that they dropped before that, July 4th of 2024, almost a year and a half ago, when we managed to get games such like Donkey Kong Jr., Math, Golf, Mach Rider, Urban Champion, like those games, they came out roughly around July 4th. I mean, it seems like we're getting an extremely slow trickle effect for NES games, in which case I feel like at this point in the game, I feel like for most people, I mean, some people like some NES games, but other people, they might not necessarily grown up in those times though. But I feel like the most important games, like your Punch Out or whatever though, your Mario Brothers 1 and 3, your Legend of Zelda, like your most important ones, along with some notable third-party games, have already been put out here on the service. Granted, yes, there are probably still some more that they can go out and do, like your Dragon Warriors or aka your Dragon Quest though. But then I think you kind of get into some weird dicey territory where some of those third-party companies are like, hey, you know what, we could probably put it out on our own as a separate individual release, still make some money off of it though. So it kind of begs into question, how many more games can Nintendo convince them though? But I don't think anybody's kind of busting their back over missing a whole bunch of NES games. Now, if we were to flip the script and jump over to Super Nintendo, I mean, we did have one recent release with Mario Paint that came out in July 29th of this year though. since it was a major marquee player in terms of showing off the mouse controls that you're able to do with the Switch 2 Joy-Con mouse, or if you still have a standard Nintendo Switch, you're actually able to just plug a USB mouse and kind of get around that though. But before that, you have to go back to March of this year when we managed to get a few more games, and then back to January. So it seems like Super Nintendo is a little better than the NES. It's like once every few months we might get a little bit of something. So basically throughout the course of a given year, you might get 3 to 4 different drops of Super Nintendo games. But I feel like we should still get a little bit more than that. I mean, in terms of like Nintendo first party games, I'm pretty sure mostly everything's out on the market right now on the service, except for like what, Super Mario RPG, and then there's like a handful of different other third-party games, like you got your Chrono Triggers and stuff out there. So I feel like Super Nintendo, they're still able to pull a little bit more games out of them versus what they kind of got going on right now. Now this next one, the Game Boy, let's just take a look at this, because the Game Boy, it's not too old. Like it still kind of feels fairly recent, because the system came out back in 2023, or should I say, you know, this whole entire system in terms of playing GBA games on the service. It came out in 2023, and we're only a couple of years of us having this for the Game Boy / Game Boy Color. And I feel like we should have more games on this service than what is kind of currently available right now. It's just a little bit odd, to say the least, though. Because I think the last time we managed to have a drop on this was back when we had like Kirby Star, Stacker, Survival Kids, Gradius, and Sword of Hope. And that all came out around like May of 2025. It's been a little bit of time since we had that. And I know the biggest candidate for games for the Game Boy / Game Boy Color, it's going to be your Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal. People are going to be clamoring hard up on this mess until the day that we finally manage to get this mess, though. I feel like it's definitely long overdue, and I just don't understand why they hadn't, managed to pull the trigger up on this mess, though. I feel like it's kind of a given that they should just go ahead and do it, though, but whatever, I digress, though. But there's a whole bunch of Game Boy Color games that they're able to pull from, especially when you start looking at the third-party games, though. But I'm like, oh goodness, it's kind of crazy, because like what, May was the last drop, before that was March, then December, and then November. So it's a little more frequent, but still, they still got them spaced out by a good chunk, though. Just a little bit unfortunate. Let's go ahead and look at some expansion pack title games, because the N64, gosh, I mean, we almost have about everything that most people should care about. Granted, there's still a good handful of third-party games that could pull from, though, but some noticeable ones that are missing from this list as it stands as of this point of this recording. Conker's Bad Fur Day for the mature rated app. You have Diddy Kong Racing and Donkey Kong 64, a couple more rare games, and a big obvious first-party game that still hadn't been put out on the service, Super Smash Bros. On the 64. Like those, at least for me personally, are like the 4 last big N64 games. And then for me personally, I wouldn't honestly care about any of these other games that they would probably try to put out on the 64 service. It'll just be like, can I find a hidden gem to sprinkle in there here and there, though? But outside of those 4, I mean, goodness, like we should be getting more 64 games than what they're actually putting out right now. Because the last time we had an update was like when Killer Instinct Gold came out, and that was back in May 16th of this year. Before that, you have to rewind it all the way back to January 31st of this year when Ridge Racer 64 came out. And then before that, it was like October of last year, June of last year. So these are spread out really far and in between. Like I feel like we should at least be getting some N64 games, if not every month, at least every other month. Keep it somewhat consistent, Nintendo. Like, my goodness. Oh shoot, you want to talk about a system that rarely ever gets updated? Look at the Sega Genesis over here, though. Last time we got something was April of this year, but if you were to rewind it back before that, it's November of 2024, then June of 2023. Like literally, I mean, the Genesis has been getting the extreme short side of the stick, where hey, you get one update one time throughout the whole entire year, and that is it. Like, we got games in 2023, one drop in 2024, and so far for 2025, only one drop that happened in April. That is an atrocious. I know there's several different games that can put out here on the Sega Genesis. Yes, maybe your diehard Nintendo S fans might not care so much for the Genesis console in comparison to all these other Nintendo consoles, though. But I mean, still, this is still a service. You should still be catering towards everybody, because I know there's some people that really love, Sega games and stuff. So I mean, we should be doing a little bit better than that. You go over here and look at the Game Boy Advance. The last time we had an update on this was back in April 22nd, and that was when they put out my old boy Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. Love that game to death. I was playing it just the other day ago, just knocking out a couple of maps here and there though. But before that, you have to look back at February 14th when they dropped out Wario Land 4. Before that, October 11th when they dropped out F-Zero Climax and F-Zero GP Legend. These are really far spread out apart, and you can't tell me with Game Boy Advance that they topped off this. No. We should be getting games consistently, at least for the GBA, every single month. We barely even touched, like what I said with the Game Boy / Game Boy Color. This system for the service came out a couple of years ago in 2023. We should still be having more a streamlined stream of games coming out at least every month, especially for the Game Boy Advance though. And then that leads us to where we're currently at right now with the newest system on the market being the GameCube, where so far they've been doing all right. Remember, we had F-Zero GX, the Legend of Zelda, Wind Waker, and Soul Calibur 2. That was where all dropped out during the launch month of the Switch 2 back in June. July, we had Super Mario Strikers. Recently, in the month of August, we had Chibi Robo. So then that leads us this month where we're probably going to get one kind of game though. And the only games that we know that are out, that's going to come out in the distant future, is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, Luigi's Mansion, Pokemon Coliseum, Pokemon Gale of Darkness, and Super Mario Sunshine. Everybody's kind of theorizing because of the Mario, what would be his 40th anniversary. This might be for the month of September, the month that Super Mario Sunshine gets managed to drop out on the NSO service. Probably in the month of October, you probably will get Luigi's Mansion. And then maybe around the month of November, I'm thinking it's probably when you're going to get like one of those Fire Emblem games, or with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. And then I think in December they'll treat us to a gift. They might give us both the Pokemon games, and that one probably will cover everything. Since Coliseum and Gale of Darkness, there's not like a ton of difference between the two. I feel like they'll just go ahead and just drop both at the same time. Either that or they're gonna have to find a way to spread them out though, but based upon what I said, it kind of makes sense to kind of do it the way how I said it. But anyway though, I digress. But yeah, that's all of the games that we know that will be confirmed coming out to the GameCube service though. So the big question is, why in the world are they giving this down to a trickle effect? Like, I feel like there's a lot of games out there, maybe not so much for the NES, and maybe we're kind of getting close with the N64, but there's still a handful of games that we still have not yet gotten, at least for Super Nintendo, and they're nowhere near finished in terms of Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and obviously we're getting consistent stuff with GameCube as it stands now though. And I feel like part of it might just be because of these, these checks that Nintendo had to cut towards all of these third-party companies and stuff, and being like, hey, you know what, we gotta, they gotta cut such a big enough check to warrant those companies from saying, hey, you know what, I could just, randomly just put these games out here on your console or other consoles and be able to make just enough money, if not a little bit more, unless you agree to my terms of how big that check you gotta cut us, Nintendo. I feel like that's probably where most of the cause and concern kind of comes from, and the reason why Nintendo's not probably putting out as many games on the service as what they probably should. And obviously they want to release this as a trickle effect in terms of the business strategy, just so they can keep customers readily, within their ecosystems in terms of this NSO service. But for someone like me that own games such as like Splatoon 3 and stuff, where I was like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna play this or have the NSO service for the better part of 24/7, because I just love playing the old retro stuff. And when I want to play a game like a Mario Kart World or Smash Brothers or Splatoon, I'm gonna want to play those games online. So for someone like me, it makes sense to have the service the whole time. But for other people, maybe not necessarily so, especially if you're only caring about playing single player experiences and stuff like that. I know a friend who mostly doesn't really have NSO service unless I give him a few codes I happen to get for free when I buy stuff from Best Buy. I mean, I guess it just happens to be like that with some people though. If you had a much more consistent schedule in terms of when you drop these games out, look, okay, I get it. You might not necessarily want to show exactly what all is in the pipeline for all these upcoming games. I get it. You kind of do that at the start of when a console drops out for your service, and then from there you just like to keep it sporadic, random, keep people on their toes. I get that. At least have some given point of the month where we notice that we can have these games drop out. Like, for example, On the first week of the month, you know you're getting NES and Super Nintendo. On the second week of the month, maybe you're gonna get some Game Boy / Game Boy Advance stuff. On the third week, maybe you're gonna get some 64 stuff, and on the fourth week, you're gonna get GameCube related stuff. Even if it's only one game, if not two games, if you consistently stagger that mess between all the different consoles that you have every single week, you'll have games dropping out in the service constantly, week after week after week for the whole entire month, even though you're only getting so many games dropping out for what would be GameCube, which is only just one. But when you combine it with everything else with all the previous consoles and stuff, it just feels like there's always something to play. I don't understand why Nintendo doesn't necessarily try to capitalize on that, because shoot, even some of their own first party games, they hadn't even put some of that stuff out there yet for some of the stuff for Game Boy Advance or Game Boy and stuff like that. You know, it's just kind of baffling just kind of looking at all of that mess though. So I feel like Nintendo, they have some things going in terms of the NSO service. I still think it's arguably better with the wide variety of games that you're able to play as of this point as it stands now in comparison to like what we see over here with PlayStation Plus. But PlayStation Plus has its own benefits as well because you're able to play more modern games and stuff. But if you're talking about a purely retro thing, like comparing their premium tier to what we have with the NSO Classics, I mean, it's a night and day difference though. I just feel like Nintendo should be able to capitalize on this a little bit better though. So yeah, so I just hate because like me and Steven, we have a whole entire NSO versus series where we actually play different games, anything ranging from the NES all the way up into the GameCube right now. And I just kind of hate how, you know, while we're doing this as a series every other week, I feel like we should be having more games dropping out that's just brand new that will just kind of get us excited to play some of those, you know, the older systems like a Super Nintendo game here and there or like a Game Boy Color game or whatever though. But those are just few and far between because of this weird release schedule that Nintendo's purely fixated on for some oddball reason though. But y'all gotta let me know down in the comment section down below what all that you think about, you know, all these different games that Nintendo has put on the Nintendo Classics so far. Are you like me and in agreement of, hey, they should be able to put out something consistently every week? I'm not saying drop out 4 games for a, you know, a NES drop or a 64 drop or a Super Nintendo drop every single time. At least give us 2 or 3, but spread that mess out between all your different consoles and have built up some kind of consistency. So that way we're not pondering and question when's the next drop and we're not going 2, 3, 4 months. Gosh, the Sega Genesis, gosh, the better part of half a year or a year at most before we manage to get the next new drop. That's all I gotta say, Nintendo. We just gotta clean some stuff up though. But yeah, that's gonna do it in terms of today's video though. So if you really like this, make sure you go and hit that like button, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that bell to stay up to date on all things video game related I feel like talking about and discussing though. So remember y'all, until our video I make next, see y'all.